Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us at our inaugural Product and Health Tech Conference. My name is Chris Hoyd. I'm the Director of Products at VYNYL, which is a product development firm that works with healthcare clients. We do everything from sort of early stage product strategy for innovation teams to comprehensive digital transformations for large healthcare organizations. I'm fortunate to get to host a few leaders in health tech today as we discuss the roles that product design and clinical perspectives play in the development of health tech products. So today I'm joined by Davina Pallone, Jillian Ahrens, and Tim Campellone. Davina, she brings over 20 years of experience as a product leader who empowers teams to find valuable, creative, and engaging solutions to complex problems. For the past 7 years, Davina has focused on the intersection of science and software. She built the product team at NeuroTrack to launch a digital platform that combines scientifically validated cognitive assessments with a personalized cognitive health intervention program. Previously, she scaled the product platform at PEAR Therapeutics to deliver software that is designed to directly treat disease, tested for safety and efficacy in randomized clinical trials, evaluated by the FDA and prescribed by healthcare providers. Jillian is a principal product designer at PEAR Therapeutics. She brings over a decade of experience in creating digital products. And since joining PEAR in 2016, she's trained her focus on prescription digital therapeutics. PEAR's commercial products include her work in both concept, strategy, and digital design. To date, Jillian's had the privilege to study, research, and design prescription digital therapeutics for substance abuse disorder, opioid use disorder, schizophrenia, insomnia, and severe depression disorder in relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. Tim is scientific director at Click Therapeutics. Tim joined Click Therapeutics as the scientific director in 2020. In his role, he is the science lead for CT155, a digital therapeutic for schizophrenia being developed in partnership with Boehringer Ingelheim. Tim also manages the research and development team, which focuses on developing and validating novel treatment mechanisms and capabilities to support the Click pipeline and platform. Prior to joining Click, Tim was a clinical director and product manager at PEAR Therapeutics. And in this role, Tim was responsible for clinical and later technical development of PEAR's digital therapeutic for people with schizophrenia. Tim also holds a PhD in clinical science from UC Berkeley. All right, thanks so much to each of you for joining me today. It's a huge privilege to get to chat with you. And I think with that, we are ready to dive in. So we'll start pretty, concretely. I wanna know what each of your roles is really like right now. So I would love if maybe Davina, if you could kick us off, tell us a little bit about what is a day in the life like of your current role?
Yeah, thanks. Day in the life for me right now is largely around program management and making sure that we are aligning all of our product development efforts with what's important to our business and what's important to our programs. A large part of that then becomes making sure that we are developing products that keep patients and participants engaged and ideally adherent to the program. Because in the business model that we have at Fruit Street, adherence to the program directly relates to the milestones that we can bill on. So it's important commercially, but those same milestones are super important to make sure that the outcomes that the patients or the participants have, that those happen, right? So you want to make sure that in the clinical care that you're delivering digitally, that you can get people to stay adherent to the program. And so you're working with your clinical team, you're working with your designers, your UX researchers, and then you're making sure that you line up the most important work for the developers. And so really kind of looking at all of those pieces and making sure that they're coming together in the right way, identifying dependencies, identifying where there might be blockers, clearing those blockers, and then making sure that everything is feasible from a legal standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, from a clinical standpoint, a technical standpoint, and then making sure that there's a really great user experience that we can deliver given all of those constraints. It's really a lot of conversations with a lot of people to make sure that we can keep everything moving and efficient also.
That sounds like a lot to fit into a day. That's awesome. Tim, what about you from the clinical side? What does an average day look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're in an exciting period of growth. Even in the 8 months that I've been at Click, it's been a lot of helping to build our internal research and development team, and really thinking about what it means to be an R&D team within a startup environment, and how we can best bring clinical knowledge and evidence generation to really facilitate the development of new programs, new products, but also support products that are already in the market, and thinking about how we can continue to evolve them by discovering new ways to either treat disease, or new ways to bring clinical science to inform the way that these products help people in their daily lives. So a lot of my time is spent working closely with my product colleagues at Click, and really thinking about how we can best integrate the scientific perspective and process within product development, and really make sure that each step we are asking the right questions, and where possible bringing data to bear to unlock new capabilities and really take our products to the next level. So it's a lot of time spent kind of equal parts brainstorming and building process as the team grows, and as we really make sure that we are set up for continued support for our entire pipeline. So really fun, but it's certainly a challenge, but a good challenge.
Awesome, thank you for that. And Jillian, from the design side, what about you?
Yeah, lots of challenges and constraints to work within. So that's a large part of the creative process, is really understanding those, and where can we can align. These constraints come from our partners. These constraints are there because we are this device that is regulated, and at PEAR we have a Class 2 medical FDA approved device, and this is very significant to us. We have 2 products that are under this classification. And what this means is that there are some really tight constraints where we have to work within to maintain that efficacy and that safety. However, there's a lot of creativity because we are software. We are iterating as a product. This drug is not just a molecule. This is the most amazing thing about digital therapeutics, is that this is something that we can learn and iterate in. Within, again, these certain goalposts, if you will. So we spend all day doing this exact same thing, understanding how to work within these posts with all of these different teams, whether it is our research team, our data science, our marketing, our commercial, very much partnered with our clinical teams to really understand what can drive engagement to these really great clinical MOAs. And part of that has been understanding specifically how we can bring the patient voice and have them really drive this engagement.
You guys are working on such high impact stuff. It's really, really cool to hear and really inspiring. I would love to hear a little more from each of you about maybe some recent work that you're sort of particularly proud of, that you've been able to work with your team to get through those constraints that Jillian just mentioned, and ship something that you think is going to make a real difference in the world. And maybe I'll kick it back to Davina, if that's something you want to elaborate on a little bit.
Recently, what we've really been focused on is again the question of increasing that engagement and increasing adherence to a diabetes prevention program. One of the things that is the most motivating is when you can look at the data that you have, and you can see the impact that it's making. In our case, being able to look at the people the participants who are coming through the program, and when they start, and the types of claims data that they have before they start, and where that claims data is after they've been through the program, and looking at the reduction in in weight, for instance, looking at the reduction in claims data, and being able to, like, those health outcomes data are very hard to come by, but being that we are delivering healthcare in a digital setting, it's really the bread and butter, and it's a really powerful tool that we have. So we use data everywhere. And so I guess coming back to your question, what's something that I'm most proud of at Fruit Street, and at NeuroTrack, and even at PEAR, setting up a robust data science capability, and also UX research. Those two things are game changing when it comes to developing anything in the health tech space. Of course, consumer tech also loves those things, where it gets super interesting. And I think Tim can speak much more to this, but the way that we can use data when developing digital therapeutics, it's not just on daily active users, monthly active users. It gets much more complex than that. We're talking about behavior change. We're talking about understanding if they're adherent, what's their engagement, what's the intersection between adherence and engagement. And when you're at a place like Therapeutics, you're talking about understanding those MOAs, like Jillian said, the mechanisms of action that we believe will lead to the positive outcomes that everybody cares about. The patients care about them, the payers care about them, employers care about them. And in that sense, I've always loved digital therapeutics, because everybody's interests seem very highly aligned. It's about the health of the patient when it really gets down to it. The health of the patient saves money. It saves time for employers, for the patients themselves. It contributes to more positive mental health when you're not trying to battle disease, in addition to everything else we have to do in our lives. And so I'm super proud of the teams that we build and the way that we set them up to function in those types of constraints. Like Jillian points out, the constraints are so numerous, but it allows us to get super creative in solving these problems together as teams, as cross-functional teams. And I think that's the whole point of this panel. It's like,
Yep.
Can't deliver, as product people, we can't design and deliver clinical healthcare without our clinical teams. And so bringing these together in order to design and deliver, and I think Jillian will speak more about how you bring the patient's voice into that also, is really rewarding from a product development standpoint.
You covered a lot of interesting stuff there. And I also think you touched on beautifully what is the point of this panel, and why this is for me such a privilege to get to bring your three perspectives together to talk through this. One thing before I ask everyone else that same question, I want to kind of double click on is you talked about the intersection between, or even the tension maybe between sort of engagement and adherence. And Jillian, I know that's something that it's kind of a balance that you have to walk often. Can you maybe talk us through how you think about that and how you approach that when you're designing digital health products?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about engagement. So you think about when these MOAs are clinically validated, they're done so through a study typically, and some very rigorous clinical studies are conducted. And that brings with it some inherent engagement. Just being a part of a clinical study, you have parameters in which to engage with the study that you're told from the outset. And when you're taking this product into the wild, after a doctor prescribes this to you, and you take that home, and you have this product on your screen, and it's right next to Netflix and Facebook, and all of these other amazing products out there. It's interesting. You almost, this digital therapeutic, this product that is meant to really deliver some serious care for your health, is right beside all of these other products that are very engaging cognitively, and so we're really competing with products that are like this, right next to all of these others. And so how do you engage you intrinsically want to engage a patient in their journey in experiencing and being, again, the driver of their healthcare outcomes, and then really adhere to the clinical MOAs. So you have this engagement to drive the MOAs, the mechanisms of action, and what's the adherence output to the entire clinical therapeutic or digital therapeutic. And so we're really looking to drive engagement so the MOAs actually are being adhered to. And so I think that's something that we really need to unlock. These MOAs have been clinically validated through many studies inside of each of our organizations and outside of them as well. We know that they are effective, but really the key to unlock is that engagement to really change behavioral change design, and really looking at it from that human-centered approach is really the secret sauce. And unlocking that, I mean, and this isn't just applied to, one specific disease necessarily. This is all of chronic disease. So how do you drive engagement to meet the kind of adherence and clinical outcomes that you need? And we've looked at a lot of different and various, and I have a lot of hypotheses on what can really work, and we can get into those a lot later. I can elaborate, but Tim, I would love to hear what you think about this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, I think you mentioned it earlier, Jillian, the notion of constraints, and that's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, because one of the things that I see is a lot of where we are as a field in digital therapeutics has been really focused on translation of what do we know works well in face-to-face treatment, and how do we translate that, and in many ways try to optimize that for digital delivery. And increasingly, I think one of the things that we're thinking a lot about at Click, and we're getting really excited about, is, ultimately there are constraints that went into the creation of evidence-based treatments, in the sense that they were being modified for and optimized for their delivery in a 50-minute kind of once a week session, if you're lucky. In some cases, it's even less frequent with shorter visits. And so you had to really structure your approach to fit within the box that you were given, in this case, the amount of time that a human could give you in the context of your treatment. And one of the interesting questions to ask is both, how do we bring novel clinical science to bear by using digital tools, but how do we also really think about what makes a digital modality unique in the way that we can bring treatment to people in very different ways that, the Aaron Becks of the world, and when CVT was being created, just couldn't have imagined. And if he had a smartphone in his hand as he was thinking about, cognitive therapy for depression, would he have done things differently if he was able to kind of deploy this kind of technology with his early patients? And it's something really interesting, because it starts to open up opportunities for introducing science to really drive behavior change in ways that are uniquely suited for digital delivery and maybe wouldn't work in face-to-face treatment at all. And that's really a space that increasingly is interesting. And I'm really excited about some of the projects that we are starting to tee up and have in flight, because I think ultimately it's going to help us start to establish novel ways of what are underlying mechanisms for diseases, and how can we kind of think about digital solutions to targeting those in ways that aren't accessible kind of in more face-to-face traditional modalities.
That is fascinating. I mean, Tim, I think you're literally talking about sort of opening or kind of questioning some tried and true, right, like clinical canon about how this stuff works. And so I mean, that's super exciting. What like truly exciting time to be in this field. I'm wondering if you can talk maybe a little bit tactically, whether it's through UX research or whatever else. How do you explore that? How do you gain the learning about what ways in which the canon might not be fully accurate? How might we advance the knowledge?
And I want to make sure I'm not slandering the good scientists that have come before me here. Right. It's less that it's what exists today is accurate and is sound. It's just what were the limitations then, the constraints that those researchers had when they were developing their theories and therapies, and how in a world where increasingly we can access people easier and have an ability to reach them in ways that we previously weren't able to, how does that unlock or provide additional avenues for intervention? And so tactically, what this looks like for us is that, we have a pretty diverse science team in terms of kind of just, background and training that allows us to kind of answer these questions or think about these questions in different ways. But as I mentioned earlier, our R&D team really is a tight collaboration with our product colleagues. So it's also, the marriage between kind of scientific thinking, but product process, and how do we bring to bear different perspectives, be it members of our team, scientific advisors who come to this with a different perspective, the perspective of people with lived experience with the disease, and really try to triangulate where are those areas of overlap where we see an opportunity. And then it's just a question of, your good old scientific method of coming up with what are our hypotheses, what's the right design for a study, and how do we build kind of a lean prototype as a first test of this to try to get some signal and see if we're onto something. And if not, we can always go back to the drawing board, we can iterate, or we can decide to pivot to the next opportunity. But it really is this kind of beautiful cross-functional process that tries as much as possible to look at the same question through as many different angles and lenses as possible, and then kind of seeing where those areas of triangulation are.
Tim, so I'm curious from your perspective, as someone who might think about user engagement or patient engagement differently from how a product leader at a very consumer-facing company might think about it. How do you sort of weigh engagement and think about that and ascribe success to it?
So when I think about engagement, one of the things I think about is what ultimately is the underlying mechanism of the treatment that we're trying to build, and then what are the experiences from more of a kind of therapeutic standpoint that map to that mechanism, and really thinking about how do we get people to engage in those loops or those features that really are kind of most tightly associated with or kind of map best to what that underlying mechanism is. So as much as possible, trying to, at least as I think about things, grounded in what do we know from the clinical scientific perspective about this disease, and try to help, be a good, partner with my product colleagues to think about how we build an experience that really brings that to life in a way that's engaging, as a good user experience, but ultimately is mapped back to what is that underlying mechanism. So ultimately, we can understand how, when we're looking at someone's, engagement over time, we can look at a particular experience or an engagement loop and have, fairly good confidence that the engagement there is going to produce the kind of therapeutic outcome that we want, because we've mapped it so closely to what the underlying kind of mechanism for that disease is.
And so in theory, once the MOA, assuming it's been engaged with in the right way and it's been very effective, in theory, it could be a good thing, right, for engagement to sort of die off, right, because the thing will have worked.
Yeah, not all lack of use is bad. I mean, I think a lot about, in our face-to-face treatment modalities, termination is often a time for celebration. When someone has gotten what they need out of treatment and they're ready to kind of go back to their lives and bring with them the knowledge that they've gotten and apply it, that's something to celebrate. And I think it's a great point, Chris, that it's not always a bad thing if someone's not using something, and having that context can really help turn what is otherwise, a moment where you might feel disheartened that someone's not using your product. Really, you're missing an opportunity to celebrate something for that individual, because it may be something where they've gained that self-efficacy and they're ready to kind of move on without the support of this treatment.
Awesome. And I think while we're on this topic of sort of being very patient-centered, I know Davina and Jillian have a lot to say about that, as well as it relates to their work. So maybe, Davina, can you just tell us about how patient-centeredness is a value for you, and how that gets sort of imbued into your teams?
There is no digital therapeutic without the patient, right? And so what's really important, and where design and UX research, what they can really bring to the table is, is considering how to meet the patient where they are and how to listen to what they need, which I'll tell you right now is, I guarantee, just isn't what your assumptions are if you are not a patient who is not struggling with that disease, right? Like, I mean, and even somebody who is a clinician who treats that disease, unless they have that disease, really needs to be all ears and lose any fixed thinking or any sort of biases they may have about what they think is going to work for somebody. It's a real, because we were always building MVPs and getting it into pilots and then trying something out and learning and iterating, it's a rare opportunity to be able to consider how you can support the patient. First of all, how you can support patients who have different learning styles, who like to take information in different ways. Somebody might like to be very handheld through their treatment, and somebody might want all the information so that they can learn for themselves. And not a lot of young digital therapeutics companies have the budget or time or resources to approach it from all the angles. Like you might find that with the Novartises of the world, or somebody who really has huge budgets and can say, we think we have people with 3 main learning styles, and we're going to give them a short survey up front and figure out what those are, and then deliver them the care depending on how they learn. So we're really trying to ride a line of being able to deliver something to a wide variety of people who, for instance, might be dealing with relapsing, remitting multiple sclerosis, right? Just because you have that diagnosis, it's not the entirety of who you are as a person. You might be somebody who has this disease who really wants to be told what to do, 1, 2, 3. You might be somebody who has this disease who really prefer to read through a lot of the literature yourself and make up your own mind. But that's not something that we have the leisure of doing often at companies where we're trying to get something into a clinical trial. We need to understand how it functions in the clinical trial, and ultimately you want to get it into the market. So speaking to users as much as you possibly can, getting their voices into the product, making sure that you hear about how they think about the disease, how they think about treatment, what they struggle with, what their doubts are, what their worries are. And the more you can build that voice into the product, and Jillian can tell so many stories about how this really works, they feel supported, and they feel oftentimes like this, this digital tool, they know it's not talking to them, but if they feel that it understands them, that there's a voice and tone, or that this isn't just somebody telling you what you should do, but it's somebody who really, it's a tool that sounds like it gets where they're coming from, then you will have the power to keep bringing them back into it, hopefully. And then that engagement that you're developing, hopefully, and with the type of thinking and the thought that Tim and his teams can put into it, it drives you towards that mechanism of action. And then that's the goal, is to get the outcomes at the end. And so I just can't emphasize enough speaking directly to actual patient panels who have that, and even more so than that. And Jillian, I'll hand it over to you, but developing deep relationships with these patients and even co-designing with them.
Yeah, Davina, I couldn't agree with you more. And just to really piggyback off of that thinking, it reminds me of quoting Adam Ghazali. He said, "When we create new technology, does it have the power to enhance what makes us humans, or does it degrade us?" And really thinking and aligning with that, it's how do you holistically elevate the entire person, inside the therapy and outside. So we've been talking a lot about these MOAs, mechanisms of action. This is the therapy is at the center of our digital therapeutics, and it's for incredible reasons. And really, it's, can you put the person back at the center as well? So they're driving it. So you have these digital therapeutics and PDTs, that are very clinically efficacious with these MOAs. But when designing a PDT, maybe we can also translate around these MOAs, not just that purely digital experience of that therapy, but what about accounting for that entire narrative of the patient, the person around it? And, after establishing relationships with hundreds and hundreds of people over the past, almost 5 years now, I started to realize just that very thing, that if you can really understand the people who live with these chronic diseases inside and out, then that story, those values, and understanding what those struggles are, that's not part of the MOA necessarily, but it's one of the most important aspects with living with a chronic disease to represent. So how do you create this like multimodal experience, very personalized experience that lets people tell their story, tell their narrative, hear and identify from others, maybe some peers, maybe coaches, maybe it's just purely through the content, but feel very understood in this extremely empathetic way. I think this is the most empowering aspects of my job, and what I've brought into our PDTs is building these relationships, hiring our patients as contractors, is creating these panels with them and bringing their voice into the product. They're creating the content. They're telling these stories. Their voices, you can hear them in our products. You can see their faces, allowing potentially even our customers to become a part of our patient advocacy program. So it's not just after they're done with the therapeutic, then maybe they can start empowering other peers as well. So I think integrating that into a PDT, wrapping around these MOAs, engaging a person that in that kind of way can really drive towards clinical outcomes, just threading that needle. How do you plug into people's lives in that time and space when they're using the digital therapy, and then how you can truly humanize that experience potentially. And I just don't think technology can do it all on its own. So it's really trying to fit into people's lives in different ways. Everybody manifests these chronic diseases in different ways. They might have the same disease, but they're very, very different the way they manifest in their body physically, the way they emotionally are responding to these diseases. It's very unique. And putting that voice into the product first, so they can first experience that, and then doing that hard work so they can almost, it's deregulating maybe something that maybe they don't want to go into the product because they feel shame or stigma, or they're just highly frustrated and alone, making them understand that you're not alone, that there is somebody there. I think that this is what can move the needle, and understanding how multifaceted that these diseases are. You can't just, I think about it, you can't just say, here's a diet plan and here's the exercises you're going to do. Or here are your triggers, for substance use disorder. Here, let's outline your triggers. Okay, now you know them. It's really having this kind of behavioral support, if you will. And so how do you holistically address these human needs in a digital platform? And I really think if you can holistically crack that code to address this across many chronic diseases, that this is, we're on the cutting edge in designing something, that we can change the way we care for patients by really putting them first. I just think, how do we leverage technology and supporting them through the emotions, and understanding where they're at first in the most personalized aspect. It just is a game changer. So tactically, we've brought people through into the product, doing co-design, designing features with them, having them write content, having them read aloud the MOA, maybe some of the therapy lessons. It's just been, we've developed a lexicon for, disease specific types, and the way people talk about the disease and think about it. That's very much outside of whether, if you have the disease or not. It's very unique. There's so many idiosyncrasies, and we've really put that learning and that understanding in the very forefront to truly understand the patient's experience, why they fail, and taking that lesson and building it into the program.
That is fascinating and admirable and inspiring. Thank you for sharing that. So you've done all this incredible work to kind of elevate, the art and science of building trust and connecting with patients and users. And you alluded earlier to some hypotheses you may have around sort of where this might head and what might be really effective. I'm super, after hearing that, I'm super curious now if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
I hypothesize that with that, having the patient's entire hearts and mind understood and being able to convey exactly, where they're at in that exact moment. So how do you do that digitally? How do you translate that? How do you know exactly what they need in that moment? Is it assessments? Is it biomarkers? Is it self-reports? How do you know? I mean, it's just really hard because you're taking out that therapist, that counselor, that provider, that care team, and you're replacing it with a screen. So you need to rely on, I think, a multifaceted approach to understanding that. Maybe it's all of the above, but you have to have, again, enough pathways to address everything, to address that emotional need, that physical need, that and even that clinical need. You have to have enough understanding, and so that takes information from the patient. And so I think that's what's so exciting about digital therapeutics and prescription digital therapeutics, is that this is a hub of getting all of that information, but you really do need the patient to be there, to want to at least provide that information. I mean, but there are ways in which the provider can then provide some of that information, and that gets fed back into the therapeutic. The provider can see the patient and, let's just say for substance or opioid use disorder and different urine drug screens. Well, those results can get fed back in, and that can be, one of the first experiences that a patient has with understanding their health and what's going on with them. And how do you take that moment and bring in, some really powerful alliance with the therapeutic, and then also with the care team as well. And so it's really interesting. So I hypothesize that it's going to be a hybrid approach, and it's going to needs to be very personalized. And this takes a lot of, deep technology to really to really power up this very personalized experience. And then it also takes that very soft skills of being able to create content that has, a patient-centered voice, specifically their voice at times, just really paired with that clinical content.
I'm going to run with that and ask Tim, are there other, clearly digital health, digital therapeutics, these are rapidly evolving spaces. Are there other sort of trends or hypotheses that you find just particularly compelling and kind of can't wait to see how they play out over the coming years?
Yeah, I think the one that I am most excited about is, getting out of, I think I kind of alluded to this earlier, but this I see a lot of where we are right now as a kind of really reliant on what's already existing in the literature and doing that direct translation. And I think what excites me is a world where we don't necessarily, wholesale move away from what we already know works, but we begin to, as a field, contribute science to the overall treatment landscape in a way that allows us to go beyond just cognitive behavioral therapy or other third wave therapies, to really embrace, new ways of delivering treatment. So kind of, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, getting out of the CVT rut, where not everything needs to be cognitive behavioral therapy. Instead, we can be asking ourselves and really pushing ourselves to think about, given the opportunity we have within a disease state to leverage technology, what can we do and how can we deliver a therapeutic value to someone in ways that maybe haven't been, explored before? And how can we do this in a way that contributes back to the overall, treatment landscape, so that these learnings, what the scientific knowledge can be made available to other people for other folks to uptake them and apply them. So instead of relying heavily on the work that's come before us, we begin to kind of pay our fair share of contributing back to the larger scientific pool, ideas and ways in which, these things that we can do and ways to help people can really be brought to bear. So I think that, to me, that's something that I'm particularly excited about, is just how we start to introduce new clinical science, led by digital therapeutics back into kind of this overall scientific process.
Very interesting. Thank you. I'll extend the question to Davina as well.
Yeah, I want to touch also on, so definitely what you said, it's going to be fascinating to see how that feedback loop changes the science, right? Like the fact that we can deliver care digitally is new, and we need to learn from it, and it's early days still. And so it is a really fascinating time to be involved in this. And then something that you said, Jillian, that really resonates with me, and it's something that I really believe right now is, in very early days of health tech, it was, let's deliver it all in an app. And then, of course, before that, it was like, well, you have to come brick and mortar and see a doctor. But you mentioned care teams, Jillian, and I think that one thing that we're really learning is that an app is an amazing bridge between a provider often and somebody in their personal lives, where like you can go see your doctor, and maybe you see your doctor, if you're dealing with a chronic disease, maybe you're seeing your doctor quite often, but there's all this time in between that maybe back in the day you'd go in and you'd get some brochures, you'd get some handouts, you could read a book. And in fact, I used to joke about the fact that, like, sure, you could give somebody a big fat PDF of all of the CVT stuff and say, here's your treatment. Right. And so the creativity comes into like delivering it in a way that's engaging, a way that keeps you involved in your care, that gives you more information, that gives you more leverage, that gives you more support when you can't access your provider. At Fruit Street, we have, in our DPP program, we have coaches that you meet with 26 times over the course of a year, and a community that you develop with other people who are in your class with you, who learn with you over the course of that year. And in speaking to our participants in this program, that community and that support with your coach is so important. But it's equally important that you're able to chat with your coach when you don't have a class, or that you can take photos of the food that you're eating and get feedback on that. And also that you can track your biometrics and see how you're doing. You can just digitally set goals and see how you're achieving them. And so both things matter to the participants, and they particularly like when we involve their family. And so we have family days when your family can also learn with you about how to prepare healthy meals and how to shop for healthy food. And so we hear time and time again that that's really important, because you're not on an island with this. You're dealing with either preventing diabetes or managing diabetes or any of these other chronic diseases that are in your life. And you also have your family, and you also have your friends. Maybe you work a job where you have a highly varying schedule. Maybe you're a police person, and you find yourself having to eat out of convenience stores. So there's like, the person's life can't be ejected from it, as Jillian so eloquently spoke to earlier. So where I see it going is digital being one part of a care continuum, and making it a bridge between your providers and maybe multiple different kinds of providers. You might be speaking to a mental health expert. You might be speaking to your primary care provider. You may be working with a coach. You may be working with a physical therapist, and making sure that we can help this be seamless in people's lives and creating that connectivity. It's so much more than just, it's all in an app, or I don't use an app and I just go and see a doctor, or this is my journey, but my family's not a part of it. And so how we can leverage technology now to really connect the dots. And I think, Jillian, as you said, to sort of uplift, like support that person and make them feel like we're not just giving them one more thing to do. Like, I don't think any of us need one more thing to do. So we have to slot this in and, again, meet people where they are and make sure that it's something that is actually adding value to their lives, not just something that they have to do or that they feel, extrinsically compelled to do, but that we don't build that intrinsic motivation, or we don't give them that lift that makes them feel like they actually, it makes their life better.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's so cool to sort of, hear you guys talk about it and sort of like light up, right? When you talk about some insight that you had, that connecting a patient with their family in a certain way, like really moved the needle in a certain way. And like, there's a direct connection between that, and an improved outcome, and your product is making that happen. Like, that's just incredible. So I think the last question I want to, or sort of topic I want to bring up to the group here is, maybe a little more sort of abstract. I want to talk about product strategy for a second. So we've talked about, a few of the ways in which, building products in health tech, sort of is unique, right? We've got regulatory constraints. We've got this sort of tension or intersection between engagement and adherence and efficacy. Even on the growth side, right? We've got like long sales cycles and all that comes up, with that in healthcare. So I'm curious, maybe if I'll start with you, Jillian, if you can talk a little bit about how you think about product strategy at a health tech company.
I think the way that I approach product strategy in a digital health space is really looking at what is the value, again, bringing it back to the customer very first and foremost. What is the value for the patient? What are we creating for them that can really move the needle on this clinical need that we have? I think a lot of times it needs to be approached with not just that clinical need and that market fit, but also that need on how we're going to deliver on the outcomes of the patient. And so, I think one of the core strategies is to deeply, again, understand that patient, deeply understand all of the different new sciences and different, like Tim, you mentioned, I think that's so exciting. Maybe it's not just a few different mechanisms of action, but even new ones. I think that's really how you're going to solve this puzzle. And if you can solve this, then, oh my gosh, it'll be a very, very successful organization. And I think at PEAR, we are doing some really innovative things, looking at things very holistically, many, many disease spaces, and looking at things, broadly about behavior change and understanding each disease and understanding how we can change behavior and how we can guide towards that self-efficacy. And I think that approach is really going to, change the landscape of digital therapeutics while really strengthening that core need, again, of that person and that care team and that alliance with everybody around them, inside and out.
Maybe, Davina, as someone who has lived and breathed product and product strategy for several years, how do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it really depends. The product that you're going to build and deliver depends so much on the business model. And those business models can vary widely. I was fortunate enough to cut my teeth on this at PEAR, where it's a very ambitious business model. I often think of them as sort of an icebreaker ship for this idea of a prescription digital therapeutic, as Jillian mentioned earlier, a PDT. And that business model, where they're making a claim that they can treat disease and be efficacious with outcomes, requires a certain process where the digital therapeutics go into clinical trials. They have to prove that they're efficacious, that the outcomes are there. And then the class 2 medical devices are regulated by the FDA. And that compliance structure that you're in, it really impacts the way that you're going to build your product teams, the way that you're going to write code, the way that you have to prove that any changes that you make to something that's already been validated aren't going to invalidate what you make. So it's a huge impact at a company. And then their business model of prescribing the app as a pill, basically, is, it also has a lot of implications about the go-to-market strategy. So at a company like NeuroTrack, where they're largely dealing with wanting to prevent dementia. And so you're talking very often about working with insurers who will be providing insurance policies for people, and they don't want to pay out on those. The nice alignment there is that people also don't want to get dementia. I mean, you don't want your insurance policy to have to pay out on your dementia, right? You just don't ever want to get it to begin with. So the way that so that's not a claim about treating disease. So it puts it in a totally different space. And so who are your partnerships with? They're not necessarily with big pharma, but they're with, like life insurance companies. At Fruit Street, we're B2B, often selling to employers. And so employers are interested in population health. And so that will dictate a certain approach to product development. And your sales, your go-to-market strategy there is making sure that the employers themselves feel that by providing this benefit to their employees, that they will actually see the benefit in less sick time taken. The costs of preventing diabetes have been made clear, and it's very efficacious for them to get people into these programs early and try to prevent it before you're even into some kind of a maintenance program. So the one commonality I see through all of it, again, is the strategy of building really tight knit cross-functional teams between product, design, and clinical. And by doing so, you're going to massively increase your chance of success. If you don't have a tight connection between your clinical and product teams, you're really missing a massive opportunity to really even leverage some of the really cool stuff that Tim's talking about, right? Like how can we be creative in thinking about delivering these mechanisms of action? How might this change what we can do now that we have the power to deliver this in a digital manner rather than in face-to-face treatment? But if you have, for instance, a waterfall mentality where you say, we have this digital or this clinical modality, and we're going to throw it over a wall to a product team and tell them to build it. I don't think that you're going to be successful because you have to educate across the organization. You have to educate your clinical team about what it means to build a product, that this can be iterative. So for instance, if you're coming from, if you're working with a clinical team that's used to treating something with pills, and they're used to doing things in that manner, then it's just sort of like, here's your pill, it never changes, please take it once a day and you'll get healthier, or whatever. I'm highly simplifying, but this is product development. So we can't iterate as quickly in some instances, depending on the regulatory structure that you might be dealing with or the compliance issues. Sometimes can't iterate as fast as a consumer tech product, but you can absolutely iterate. It's not the same with a molecule. I mean, maybe you can put a candy coating on it if people don't want to take it, but it's not the same sort of thing, right? And so building that relationship between the clinical teams, the UX research teams, the product development teams, the design teams, to really say, here's the problem space. Let's really understand it really, really well. And now let's solve that. And then you do want to work with your marketing teams and the market research and your go-to-market teams to make sure that you know where this is going to land. And sometimes that in and of itself is going to tell you what you have to build into the product. But oftentimes that stuff's not incredibly user-facing. I mean, it might be if it's a matter of understanding how you're going to pay for this. Have you met your deductible? Is there an out-of-pocket maximum if you're doing telehealth or something like that? But the tight knit between clinical, coming all the way back full circle to this panel, clinical design and product have to be best friends and really have a healthy relationship, a lot of respect. And so strategically, if you're building a company, making sure that you build that in from the ground level is going to be one of your recipes for success there.
Having worked with both Davina and Jillian, it's probably not surprising that I land very similar in terms of how I view this. And I think couldn't agree with you more, Davina, there, that I really think, one of the things I find fascinating about digital therapeutics is this space between your product strategy and your clinical strategy is pretty small in the sense that they are trying to achieve the same thing. And, how I viewed my role as a clinician or kind of working with a product development team really is exactly what you were saying, like really looking at myself as a clinical guardrail of how do I not necessarily change the process, but rather try to enhance and provide some understanding of kind of what the contours are, provide education, and just help really unlock the potential of that process, that cross-functional team and that cross-functional process. I mean, there's certainly on the margins other things you can do from a clinical strategy standpoint, just as I'm sure there's on the margins things you can do from a product strategy standpoint. But I think it's one of the things that makes digital therapeutics so fascinating is it is like you live and die by how well your clinical and product teams can work together, align, and really drive outcomes for the people that you're building products for. And it's one of the things that I personally love about working in this space is my collaborations and my time working with people like Jillian and Davina are some of my happiest times at work. And at Click, it's the same thing of my time spent talking to my product colleagues and really seeing how they process and try to break down a problem that I am also trying to break down, and watch how we come at it from very different perspectives, but we're trying to achieve the same outcome. It's just, it makes it so much better, and we ultimately do better work because of it.
Tim, I was going to say I didn't envy you for following Davina's perfect explanation there, but that was great. Thank you.
I would love to follow up just really quickly, because I love these two people so much, and I am just like so on this bandwagon real quick. It doesn't have to be a part of it, but I mean, it's pretty special. So as a designer and coming from a very, traditional design background in a lot of different agencies, and then making slowly the shift into digital health tech, it wasn't until it was midpoint at my time at PEAR where I realized that there's this moment where design and psychology really, really do meet. And it was working with, Tim and other clinical directors where that you really need to understand the discipline of the psychology of what's going on with this specific disease. And we could just talk for hours and just listen. And it was just incredible, because I, as a designer, it's this union of these two disciplines. So I would study and listen and learn all of the intricacies of this, like the psychological, these therapies for all of the diseases. And we would just, that partnership, it couldn't happen without that. So one, I think a designer needs to be a human-centered designer. And intrinsically with that, you are very motivated and curious to unwrap the onion layer of everything this means for this person you are designing a therapeutic for. And then you can really partner together to design these really innovative patterns and these technologies that maybe don't even exist yet, right? Connecting all of these incredible different clinical MOAs and understanding these experiences and how you can piece them together to form new insights for patients. It's one of the most exciting parts about this whole field, I think, is this shared goal to understand, restore, and essentially try to aid in the healing and wellness of a person. It's just incredible. I think about when I did this with both the product I worked on for schizophrenia. It was a pipeline product at PEAR with Tim, and I worked with another clinical director for a product for multiple sclerosis and severe depression disorder, or depression disorder, excuse me, multiple sclerosis and depression disorder. And I learned so much about these two diseases and the specific types of MOAs and how you need to translate them. And it was just this partnership that with that, we could understand how we needed to deliver the user experience and shape it and mold it in a way that then a patient was able to really digest it and learn aspects about themselves and their patterns and their behavioral habits, and really lead to that efficacious outcome. It's just so exciting. And with 006, for the MS product, specifically, we connected that what I talked about earlier, that we started the therapeutic. Each time a patient would log in, we would ask them, "Hi, how are you today?" We would call them their name or what they would like to be preferred to be addressed by. And we would just ask how they're doing. And this was a chat bot, and it used a lot of if-then logic. So we had just a huge tree of content for any specific space that a patient was in at that moment. And we just responded with empathy first. And we met them where they were. And we told them, yeah, I hear you. I really get that. And all right, let's understand emotionally what's going on here and take it a little bit deeper. And they were able to rate things on a scale. And then we're, hey, let's offer some different choice points for where you're at right now behind the scenes. Again, so the patient could drive what they needed to do. And then depending on what they said that they wanted, maybe it's, a cognitive restructuring activity. And then they would go through that. And maybe they needed to understand, hey, ask them, are any of your physical symptoms relating to your emotional ones? Okay, yeah, they are. Oh, no, they're not. We would respond either way. And then we would really understand what idiosyncratic thought, like what unique thoughts, distorted thinking, as it's said and known. What are you having? What's going on right now? And then they could read all of these different responses from a lot of different patients who also are having similar thoughts or negative thinking patterns. So then they're not even feeling like they're not alone, right? But I'm explaining this situation, this specific use case, because it's not like this delivery of cognitive restructuring is in a book. This is that kind of solutioning and brainstorming happens with a human-centered design approach, understanding design principles and user experience, and with that clinician. And then we can even understand how we can surface up all of the insights, after a week, learning different behavioral patterns, different thoughts. Oh, you're having these symptoms. Generally, you're having pain in your body when, you're doing these things and having these negative thoughts. How about thinking about these thoughts that you identified? So it's really exciting incorporating that teamwork portion, that R&D, into really getting at those innovative solutions. And, I think, Tim, you got equally as excited about understanding how we could utilize AI and free text and chatbots and biomarkers. And it's just so exciting, all the emerging technologies and how we can together, bring those forward. And also, I think, Tim, he got deep into Figma. You were writing out like all this amazing content in Figma, designing different flows and wireframes. It was just incredible.
I have fond memories of sitting in our WeWork in a phone booth talking to you about jobs to be done. So it cuts both ways. Clinicians can learn about design thinking and product thinking, and product folks can learn about good old-fashioned clinical science. I think that's the beauty of the collaboration.
Well said. So just cut to that point and
I think that's the perfect note for us to end on as we come up on time here. So to Davina, Tim, and Jillian, thank you so much. I couldn't, think more of what you guys are doing, and you just being on the front lines of driving some really incredible products. This was a huge privilege for me. Thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you so much, Chris. This has been an honor, and I can't wait to talk more in the future together with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much.